This is Henry Sanders, CEO of 365 Media. I want to thank you for joining us today in our Last Impact town halls that we're having out throughout this year. And we want to start off our first one. We want to really start with that Fox Valley area. And I know the people in that area, when I say Fox Valley, they think I'm leaving Green Bay. I am not. From my layman words perspective, I see Fox Valley from Green Bay all the way down to Fond du Lac, probably is our area. So that's how we see it. And I want to thank all the panelists and people who joined us on this wonderful conversation and rich conversation. Thank you for watching. But first, before we jump in here, I want to introduce our wonderful panelists. I would say that's because I'm calling them panelists. I want to say my friends. I think they've all become friends of ours over the years. So Maya, will you introduce yourself first and tell us a little about what you do, your background?
Yeah, thank you, Henry. And again, Henry, my name is Mai, and the pronouns that I use are she, her, and hers. My 9-to-5 job is I am the director of the Multiethnic Student Affairs Office within the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, in Green Bay, Wisconsin. And I'm one of the individuals that has the privilege of working in the Green Bay area and living in the Fox cities. So when you say Fox Valley, I agree with you, this big region that we have. So I definitely agree with the regional sense of all the way from Green Bay, Marinette, all the way down to Fond du Lac. So it's a privilege to be here, and especially with the two other panelists or the two other friends that are also here also.
Thank you for joining us. It's always a blessing to see you. Robyn, what about you? Will you go next for us?
Sure, I'm happy to. And again, thank you so much for the invitation. My name is Robyn Davis, and I am president and CEO of Brown County United Way in Green Bay. And I'm about to celebrate my 5-year anniversary, which will be next week. It's flown by, even within the context of these last 2 years. So looking forward to this conversation and being here amongst friends. Thank you.
Congratulations, 5 years. That's gone fast, super fast.
Yeah, it has.
Wow. Well, thank you for joining us. Chairman Hill, my good friend up there, tell us about yourself and what's going on with you.
Yeah, Suguli Sogwake, greetings everyone. Tehassi Dazi Hill, chairman for Oneida Nation. I guess general responsibilities is everything and be everywhere. So Oneida Reservation is located just southwest of Green Bay. And so, again, we have about 17,000 tribal members. We have about 7,500 that live in the two-county area of Brown and Outagamie County. And we provide general government services to our membership and community, and have an annual economic impact of approximately $750 million annually. So we do a lot, and we employ a lot of people, and we provide a lot of services, everything from education, healthcare, the full gamut of stuff. So again, I'm glad to be here with friends, and I always enjoy my time here.
I'm glad you brought all that up, Chairman, because I think a lot of times the people who are not part of the indigenous population, I think it's just about casinos, right? They just have casinos, and that's, a very ignorant way to think. But, a lot of people think that. So you rattle off all the stuff you're doing. I want people to know that, you're a nation and you're doing a lot of stuff, helping a lot of people. I think that's really important for people to know. So, okay. So before we start getting into other issues, I just really want to talk to each of you in the past couple of years with COVID. It's impacted us in a lot of different ways. How are you doing? How are you dealing with COVID and the things that have happened in COVID? It's impacted everyone differently, so how has it impacted you, and how are you feeling now after going through, I don't want to say we're through it, but going through what we've gone through for the past couple of years? And I'll start with you first, Robyn. How are you doing?
Well, I appreciate the question, because as leaders, we're often not asked how we're doing, right? And if we are, then you have to put on I'm doing great, and then we move on. So I feel like since I was an English major in college, I sometimes go to literature and I think about, I forget which Charles Dickens novel it was, but the opening line is, it was the best of times and the worst of times, right? And so for us, it was and has been the best of times in terms of how we were able to mobilize and respond to the community. As a leader, to see our organization do that, and something that we had talked about when I joined the team in 2017, and to see that strategic direction, refreshed direction come into play. And when people said, oh, what are you all doing at Brown County United Way? And then to see we were getting ready for a pandemic that we didn't know was going to happen. The social justice and the racial unrest as a leader, it's been hard, right? In terms of the emotions that I've experienced and how to lead through that and how to lead through it graciously and courageously, right? And some days were easier than others. And even, just this season has struck me in a way that it never did before. And then being honest about here's how I'm struggling today, and having a board to support me in that process, and the village that I have has been powerful. And then to say, we're going to keep leading because that's what we do. And then how are we going to continue to serve our communities?
I love to use the word village, right? It's like that's like a community sense of village and people helping each other. I've also learned that the pandemics, people have isolated themselves a little bit, right? And so those people seem not to do as well. So I'm glad to hear that you were not going through this alone. Yeah. I have so many more questions I want to follow up on that, but we'll come back. Chairman Hill, how are you doing?
Yeah, I think coming into this position and in the middle of a pandemic for my second term was a bit tough, having to make some tough decisions early on, closing down our main revenue generator, which would be our gaming facility for 68 days. And the economic impacts that had on our community was tough to have to make those types of decisions. And so, that wore on me pretty hard in the beginning of this, beginning of this term, which was the middle of the pandemic. And so, as time went on, I think things started to become more clear, I guess, as to what we need to do to respond to the pandemic with our public health state of emergency and, masking mandates and trying to eventually get to the point of getting vaccinations available and into the community. I think we're apparent that those challenges need to be met, and I'm so grateful to our employees with the nation that were able to assist leadership with getting these things addressed as quickly as possible. So it was great to see the organization leadership pulled together real quickly and really tight to be able to navigate through this pandemic. So, that was hopeful during the pandemic, one of those, the silver lining that we're able to do such things that we're able to do, and then provide things like food boxes and elder food boxes and things like that. It's obviously a loss of a lot of jobs during that time as well. So that was always probably the main concern is kind of the household economy, for our membership in our community, the negative effects, and then trying to mitigate that by providing such things like rental assistance and mortgage assistance through that time, and then the food boxes and things like that to help families get through. And even with our school system, having gone virtual on overnight, essentially, been able to get the technology into families' hands for, hotspots, because parts of our reservation have very low connectivity rates, if any. So that's a continued challenge, but I think as we're coming hopefully through to the endemic here, that those challenges are highlighted, so we know, what's needed, most needed in our communities. So, I'm coming through this, hopeful, and and hopefully that, the things that rose to the top, we can continue to address and ensure that, we have a safe community, an educated community, and that financially families are able to provide for themselves.
So Chairman Hill, my brother, I'm gonna rephrase this question for you, because what you did is what most leaders do, or most parents do, or people who have some type of responsibility when they say, well, especially leaders, and I think Robyn mentioned this earlier, said, how are you doing? And then you rattled off all the stuff that you were doing to help others or helping your nation, but you didn't answer my friend first. How are you doing? And I think we really, as leaders, we need to talk about that. Like, how are you doing, brother? As a leader of all that weight of taking on all those responsibilities and making sure people can feed their families, make sure the nation is thriving, going through political being reelected. I mean, that can't be easy. And I know sometimes, as for men, it's hard for men to talk about these things sometimes. So I'm going to rephrase it to you because I know we're family, we're brothers. And so I want to rephrase you. So, brother, how are you doing?
Man, Henry, it's been tough. But, similarly, I am hopeful, and I'm glad that, I have a strong wife as well who really, guided me, and we're able to, I guess, reconnect on another level, deeper level, through both, through the family setting, because we have older kids and grandkids, so the pandemic affected them all kind of differently, and they're all, most of the kids are pretty extroverts, so they're really out there going and being, coaches and assistant coaches and dealing with a lot of those types of things, and so having to talk them through, the different situations within their families as well, I think raised us to another level, I guess, in our relationship. So I'm very happy for that.
Thank you. And I love that, because when you said that, first thing that came to my relationship with my wife, and we've become closer. We've always become closer, but our family's become closer because of the pandemic. We have to be around each other more, and there's no running away from each other, being busy, so that's good to hear another man say that. I think that's good for people to hear that. My friend, how are you doing?
Thank you for asking, Henry. I think as somebody who is a natural introvert, I think I thrived in the pandemic.
That's so hard for me to believe that you're an introvert.
Yeah.
I just don't see that.
I am a natural introvert with strong extrovert skills when needed, but naturally, as an introvert. But the pandemic for me personally and professionally, not only was, unexpectedly welcomed, but it was an opportunity to mental health wise thrive, because it enabled myself to prioritize what my values were and what I considered and what my family considered to be high priorities. So I think of all things, me as a leader, me as a person, I was able to learn from the pandemic on what I was willing to literally die for. Like what am I going to go out there? What am I literally going to be, dying for? And it just kind of really helped myself prioritize what was important to me, and my ability to say yes and my ability to say no, and also who had high value in my life.
Oh, that's interesting. Saying no, that's always hard to say no to things, right? Especially if people are always trying to ask you to be a part of things. I know all of you are people. I know everyone knows you up there, and everyone wants you to probably be a part of everything. Saying no. So a question I have is for all of you is, and because each of you have a community, but there's communities within communities, right? And so how has this impacted your communities, the pandemic over the past 2 years? Like, how has it impacted the community that you actually are involved in? Like, how has it impacted that and what you do? I'm going to start with you, Chairman Hill.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I guess broadly, I think I'd probably just start with the youth. Obviously, the educational impacts of being virtual for essentially a year, and then with us, a lot of our facilities being shut down, like the fitness center and recreation centers. So those have yet to be seen impacts, of youth being able to be active and engage with other children, of their age and things like that. So we don't know what those lasting impacts will be of that isolation on young people. So that's one thing. And then another, I think, sad part is obviously the loss of life, whether it's COVID or other causes. Early on in the pandemic with, not having necessarily the usual funeral services and wakes and things like that was very hard on families and the community. And I think, and then also, with the loss of so many jobs in the region, I think we're still feeling that impact as well. Even though there's a lot of vacancies, I think, up in this region and probably across the country still, just the fact of not being able to hire positions for within the organization is an odd spot to be in, as well as a kind of a lasting impact from the pandemic. And then even like today's chat we're having here today, the immediate adoption of virtual meetings, going from in-person meetings and conferences, was difficult for some and welcomed by others. And so we're still having that, argument amongst ourselves of should we stay virtual for things or hybrid meetings? And so, currently our business committee runs a hybrid meeting where we're, generally we're in person, but our guests are able to be called in for their reports and whatnot via Teams meetings. So there's definitely been some efficiencies created with technology and being able to get those types of technologies adopted forcefully. But it's I think it's a good thing in the end. So again, I just try to make sure we're hopeful and try to make sure we're seeing the silver lining in such horrific events such as this pandemic.
I'm curious, do you think more people watch or pay attention to being virtual? Like if you did a virtual event or something versus in person, do you think did that impact you at all as far as people's eyes watching what you do?
Yeah, I think especially for like our subcommittee meetings, we have like a community development planning committee where that's fully virtual still. So that's where obviously we talk about infrastructure and buildings and things like that. So we get greater participation that way of people, just being able to email and request a link to, view or participate and be able to, obviously raise their hand and ask questions on whatever projects we're discussing. And it creates that efficiency as well of not having to pull, top management from different offices on the reservation to come and meet in person and then have to drive back to their offices for, an hour meeting. So that creates that efficiency. So I think we're glad to be able to have that option now.
That's great. Yeah, it'll be interesting how this virtual versus non-virtual world plays out in the future. So that that's too could be continued for everyone, I think. But so how about you? How has pandemic past years impacted your community?
And when you say community, I think for all of us who identify as BIPOC individuals, I think there's so many subcommittees in that. So I'm going to speak from the lens as a Hmong individual coming from a collective community. I think about how this has impacted my Hmong community because it's very vulnerable within predominantly white space. And I think about that kind of like how good intentions do nothing without intentional actions, and what I mean by that is like, we understand the importance of representation, but I think the pandemic magnified what happens when there's not authentic representation at the table. So, for example, working or getting the vaccines and the boosters to my Hmong community, things were translated but put on social media, but that's not where my community gets their information. and then wondering why the numbers aren't there, or, not realizing that there's intergenerational families, and that, packaged items or, shots or like that doesn't meet the quantity or the high numbers that actually live in the household. So I think within my community, it was really getting, again, the disparity of those who can successfully navigate within an English-speaking Western society, or, infrastructure, and then having access, but then realizing that there was part of your community that couldn't navigate, didn't have access, didn't have internet, who was not getting that information. And then our dominant culture, not understanding like the historical knowledge of health disparities, or having to educate on the fear of kind of, what it is when somebody who doesn't look like you giving you shots, or even gender dynamics. So I think for me, that's how it's impacted my community, and me being kind of the, me having to be the liaison of saying, it has to be hosted by the community to serve the community. So I think for me, that's how it's impacted, particularly my community that identifies as Hmong.
First, I always shocked when people don't understand the big Hmong population that we have in Wisconsin. I was like, we have the third highest Hmong population in the country. So it always shocks when people don't understand that. But I'm curious, Mai, when you have these conversations with people, were they open-minded, or were they offended when you said, hey, look, the messenger matters and how you do it matters, like be authentic, but the messenger matters? Have people be offended? Because I've ran into something.
Oh,
like, what do you mean we can't do that? Like, and they feel like slighted.
It's a constant, because again, when you're bringing that, you're really explaining that your good intentions don't matter without intentional actions, and I think that's always, again, people don't take it professionally. They take it very personally, but I want to do good, and you're telling me that I'm not, and so, yes, I mean, there's been really hard conversations on saying, if the intentionality is to serve this population, you're doing it wrong. And as someone who identifies with that population, I'm going to tell you why. And I'm going to tell you why you also don't know, because when you're making these decisions, nobody who looks like me is at the beginning point of those decisions.
Well, you need to, if it works, you need to go teach classes around the state, because I know lots of leaders of color are having this conversation, right? And I think our well-meaning allies who want to help sometimes feel slighted, because we're saying, no, we want your help, but the messenger matters. Like, we have to and the intentionality of it, and where you go and how you do it, all that matters. There's an ecosystem to this. So I think that's important. So you should take that on the road, Mai. That's a training.
I'll take it on the virtual road. No, but yeah, if that's something that they can take back. I mean, I think that's one of the things that I've really learned. And again, this is the same within my Spanish speaking population. This is the same with my Black community, with my Indigenous population. It really is not only message and intent, but it's also messaging and who's giving that. The only thing that I've been able to tell allies is your good intentions, they really do nothing without intentional actions, which means who's really at the table, who's really planning this, and then also who's visibly there to really get the type of success and the type of numbers that we would want, particularly with this pandemic.
Thank you for this. And this brings up so many other questions I want to ask, but I want to make sure I get to Robyn. What about you, and how has this impacted your community?
So when you, to Mai's point, I think about how many different communities I'm a part of, right? And initially, and immediately, I should say, when you asked the question, I thought about the United Way community and the organization that I lead. And the pandemic and the issues and the fallout, however you want to describe it, after the George Floyd murder, we had to have a conversation as an organization and look at our mission statement and our vision statement, and say, if this mission statement is real, then we need to think differently about how we do our work. And we also need to encourage and challenge our colleagues in the nonprofit space as far as how we do our work. So when we say we're here to strengthen every person in every community, it means every, right? And that means when we start looking at the data around the disparities that African-American families, Latino families, Asian families, Native families are facing, then we need to face up to it and then have the hard discussion, even though it might make us squirm and feel uncomfortable. And that's not necessarily the easy spot for the person of color to share that message, right? Because then you hear, well, Robyn, we have you and we're good. And I'm like, okay, we're not actually that good. Like the fact that we made that statement could be problematic, right? And so embedding having the difficult conversation and saying, we need to embed these values throughout our organization, right? And, I mean, this touches on to some of the other questions that you have later, but the intentional actions, right? This is what we meant. We weren't talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging when we crafted that statement. Nobody was really thinking about that. But fast forward, we're here now. So now we need to have the conversation. And as a leader, if I'm to continue to feel empowered, encouraged, supported as the leader, then this conversation is necessary. Throughout our organization, from governance to everybody that works here. And that conversation was happening in my other communities, right? Amongst African-American women, whether they were in the corporate sector, whether they were in government, we're all having this same conversation, supporting each other. And then what are the solutions? How do we craft the solutions so we can move forward as a community?
That's wonderful. You've said so much there, and I want to come to it because you said something about women. So we have a question about women I want to come back to. But I do, this is a question we didn't talk about beforehand, but I'm just listening to you all, and it just begs to be asked. Someone who doesn't live in the Fox Valley, but knows the data, right? I know from 2010, 2020, the people of color grew about 40% in that area. And that's huge. I mean, that's tremendous, that growth. But I also know that if you look at the state data, the people who are not getting vaccinated the most were in that area. But we also know that COVID impacted people of color at a high rate, right? So how as leaders in that area did you balance that world of being in a world of leading, being a person of color who's leading, but also being an area that, that the culture up there wasn't about necessarily, and this, I'm not saying everyone, right? I'm just saying the data, like they weren't people weren't getting vaccinated up there as much as they were in Dane County, for example. How did you balance that out of educating and bringing people along saying, no, we understand that might be your belief, but this also impacts our communities of color? Because you had to play both sides of it. This is not about being pro-vaccine, against vaccine. I'm just wondering, how did you deal with that, recognizing that COVID did impact communities, especially the Black community, right? So, like, how did you guys deal with that and navigating that field? Who wants to take this question? Because it's a tricky question. I didn't plan for this one, so this is a kind of a tricky one. Chairman?
I'll volunteer to go ahead and kick this one off. Yeah, I think for us, it was just constant messaging. Again, I think I know I was out there quite a bit, with communications, whether that be in collaboration with the county and other public health officer and offices, trying to make sure that I guess people of color are represented in their commercials and things of that as well. So I'm very thankful that, they did think of us when they were doing their media campaigns for our participation and input in those messaging as well, for trying to encourage people and families to be vaccinated. With our membership, we're at like almost 62.5% vaccinated. And that's our entire membership, not just in the state, but, across the world, that we're able to measure anyway. So, I think there really was a lot of policy and economics as well of trying to get people to be vaccinated. Obviously, historically, the Native American community hasn't been treated all that well when it comes to health disparities. We have some of the largest health disparities in the country as well, and so there is that hesitancy of one believing in that the vaccination is a good thing. So we have a history of getting subpar treatment and subpar medications and things like that through the federal government. So there's that historical hesitancy as well that we're trying to overcome, which was a big hurdle for us. And one of my friends said, "Well, everybody's getting this vaccine. We're not getting a different vaccine. So if they're giving it to the white community, it should be safe for us too." So trying to kind of share that message that we're not getting something different than everybody else. Obviously, with as we talk about other issues, like the boarding school era and the amount of children that were passed away in those settings, again, from subpar health and treatment and abuse. So there's not very strong faith in the federal government when it comes to that type of stuff. So that's something that we were against the grain on as a government, tribal government, trying to overcome that probably single largest hurdle for our population. And so, that was rather difficult to deal with. But again, I think it was really just trying to make sure that individuals were sharing their stories of getting vaccinated and trying to get that on social media and into our tribal newspaper and things like that. People sharing their stories and their very little side effects and things like that as a means to try to again get people to get vaccinated to protect those who couldn't be vaccinated, whether it's at the time that the young people weren't necessarily cleared to be vaccinated. So I think it's just trying to share that scientific data with the community to again try to help them make a healthy decision.
Do one of you two want to join us? And again, your comments made me think about this question, so that's why I brought it up.
Yeah, Henry, I can share from the university level when it was early with the vaccines. I know that a lot of our young people were very excited to come back in person because we had vaccine clinics. Because when they were living with their parents wouldn't take them. So it might have been composing attitudes or opposing views on the vaccination. So I know that a lot of our young people shared that they've been wanting to, but either parental permission or access wouldn't allow them to until they got onto our campus, which had the vaccination clinics. And then for some of our students who live in very rural, remote areas, at the start of it, people weren't serving them in the rural areas. So until they came to our campus, until they came to college is when they would have access to it. So I know that was early when it was getting phased, when the vaccine was there. I don't think we were thinking about the infrastructure or kind of just the access to it. I think the mentality was that people would come to and then not meeting the people where they're at, kind of philosophy, especially at the beginning stage of when the vaccine was rolling out. So that was what I was able to witness on our campus was a lot of young people who were like, I've been wanting this for so long, but my parents don't believe in it, or my parents wouldn't take me, so I couldn't. Or it was just they were in such like rural, remote areas where they're like, nobody was coming up. It either was, I'm driving 2 hours to get it, or I'm going to college next week, 2 hours, and I might as well wait for it. So it's so it really is access. And so I know that was something that I was able to witness at the beginning of the rollout with the vaccine. I know within, again, my BIPOC community and the other communities that I assisted was really just the messaging of, was it really for us? working with undocumented, working with DACA, people were just kind of hesitant of, is my physical safety going to be okay? What is the access? And then also, the miscommunication about costs. Is this something that's going to come back? Is it really free? So I think all that deterred, particularly our financially vulnerable populations who were unsure of, again, like what Chairman Hill of already what it was, and then the financial aspects of what might come back and haunt them after of, am I going to get a big bill? Is this going to come back? I have 5 children. What does this mean? I know within my community, it was just recommending and saying that you need to have evenings and weekends, because people are still working. Whereas I think white collar professionals were still in that virtual safety or virtual working, not realizing that a whole nother population is really out there still, working and not able to meet, clinic hours. And that we need to really meet the clients where they're at, which means, evenings, weekends, and serving their availability.
Wow. I didn't think about the rural aspect of that. So that's a good point. Really good point. Robyn, do you want to talk about this? I'm asking Robyn. You can don't answer this question, but because you wear a lot of different hats, meaning being United Way, meaning you have a lot of different people you have to deal with from different backgrounds. And if anyone had to navigate that, you had to navigate it, is my guess. How did you have to navigate that, or am I assuming?
Certainly we did. And I would echo everything that Chairman Hill and Mai said, that when you talk about who's at the table when the discussions are taking place, critical, who's represented in the literature when you are publicizing things. How are you going to where people live and play and perhaps work, right? And this idea, and this is something, a lesson learned that I really am hopeful and continue to raise this in discussions. One of the lessons we learned was how to deliver services in a different way and not always expect people to come to us. We're just going to sit in our office and our building and wait till they come through the doors. And when they don't, oh, well, there must not be a need, and not taking into account all of the other aspects and variables and barriers that we create ourselves when we're well-meaning, right? And so mobile vaccine clinics, right? The 3 health systems, get the bus that goes to the parks, get the bus that goes here, there, and everywhere where people gather. And even if it's just one person that shows up in that moment, that was worth it, right? Because that's one life that was saved. We worked with the local health departments there were calls on a weekly basis, sometimes more than that, to talk about how are we going to get our arms around the pandemic? How are we going to get the word out to folks that it's safe, that you need to show up, and overcoming the historical barriers, right? It's real why folks were like, nah, I'm good, right? I'm just going to take my chances and we'll see how this works out. And really being able to speak to that, like going to churches, like where do people congregate where we can share the message? And that meant folks having to think outside of their paradigm.
One thing that you all have hit on, and which is sad, is the history of all your communities and how they've been mistreated, or why this mistrust is there. Real reasons, I think sometimes if you're not part of the culture, you don't understand. But these are real historical, factual reasons that people mistrust the government. So that breaks my heart listening to that. But thank you for answering that question. I know it was a tough question, and you all answered it really well. Okay, so we have this question about women, and I think it's a really, really great question. So women felt it the hardest during the pandemic. The stress of children, work, home life, and isolation caused some incredible levels of stress. Last year, the Women's Fund in Northwest Wisconsin region worked together to survey around 1,000 women from Green Bay, Oshkosh, Fond du Lac, and Fox Valley with an online survey between March 16th to April 27th. Pre-pandemic, 40% of Northwest women experienced moderate or a high amount of daily stress. During COVID-19, 75% of women reported that they were experiencing moderate or high stress. Thinking ahead, approximately 50% of all surveyed women were anticipating to experience a moderate or high amount of daily post-pandemic stress, less than during the pandemic, but more than pre-pandemic levels. What do employers, leaders need to do to support women in your community? I'm gonna start with you, Ms. Davis.
All right. Well, let me say this first, going back to our previous conversation about what are the kinds of issues that our communities, BIPOC communities, have traditionally faced. Stress is not new, right? And data was there already. When I think about my mom and grandmother and all of the other mothers throughout history, like we've dealt with stress. And so sometimes it doesn't come to the forefront until the majority starts to encounter stress. And now it's an issue. I'm not downplaying it, but I just want to call out that this isn't anything new. Similar to disparities, the numbers were there before, right? It was exacerbated during COVID, but the data was there. The question was who was looking at it and what were we doing about it in terms of co-creating solutions. So now that I'm off that soapbox, I think that with mental well-being, we have to destigmatize, right? And have the conversations, have the open conversations. And when people say, how are you? That we're really listening, right? And with an ear towards what are we going to do next? How are we going to support you? Does that mean a flexible work environment? And taking into account that women are often the primary caregivers, not only for children, but also for now aging parents. So what kind of support do we provide with respect to childcare, with respect to schedules? How do we diffuse or change the conversation that if I am transparent about my struggles, what does that look like in terms of my future with an organization, right? Am I going to, lose out on a promotion? Like all of these factors that will inhibit someone from coming forward and saying, hey, I need help. I need support. Maybe I need a job share. Just really being innovative and creative and not punitive when individuals come forward and when women come forward and share how what the struggle and what the challenges look like.
Yeah, that's good. And do women feel comfortable coming forward and saying that they have this stress or whatever it is too? I think the culture has to be there. But Mai, same question for you.
And again, I think this is, again, I'm going to think regional just because we're in predominantly white space. I love that this has been identified, but knowing that we need more mental health counselors and then more mental health counselors who have BIPOC identities. So when you're in a predominantly white region, like we are in the Fox Valley or Northeast Wisconsin, mental health counselors who have cultural competencies, cultural affinities really then is reduced because that visibility isn't there. So sometimes the solution isn't always there because people will say, oh, we'll go see a counselor, and I'll be like, oh, well, there's only 3 Hmong counselors and I know, and so I always tell them like there's that difficulty of even finding, the right solution that could really help within that community also. So that's something where I know oftentimes when I bring, mental health issues up, I think people just say, oh, well, then you go see a counselor. Again, negating that access is available. Also, who is giving that service is also really important. And particularly within our region, being a predominantly white community, people can't seek individuals that can have cultural sensitivity or cultural affinity that would really serve females with BIPOC identities. I know within the news, we're calling it the great, resignation and stuff like that, and I often laugh because I think the pandemic has really helped us prioritize. And I just call it more of like the great prioritization. I think employees, people are just really looking and really prioritizing what is important, and particularly women are prioritizing, saying, if you don't have a flexible work schedule that accommodates, my children or daycare, it doesn't make sense, and I think those are all things that employers are now realizing. And again, realizing because now male counterparts are dealing with it also, or are also addressing it also. So this balance of daycare work has always been there, like Robyn said, but because the dominant, males and fathers are now like dealing with it, it now becomes a high priority. I think employers need to realize that for them to support women, again, I think who's at the table of making those decisions. We still come from, where a lot of CEOs, a lot of our leadership is still predominantly male, and, they're able to either provide an opportunity for their partners to stay at home and be with the children, whereas, two-parent households aren't always like that, or single households, single parents aren't able to have that luxury. And I think that we're seeing that vulnerability. But I know that for a lot of employers, they're saying, this big resignation. And I'm just saying, I think people are just prioritizing and saying, this is what's important. And people don't, they don't live to work, people are realizing that.
Yeah.
But one of the things I would say, particularly within our BIPOC community, is that, again, I stress about that, like most of our communities, particularly BIPOC, is collective. So we're responsible for the aunties, the uncles, the grandparents. It's not that nuclear Western concept of my immediate family. We really take that family structure and how it translates into first cousins, multiple cousins, aunties, all of this. There is such that sense of responsibility as caretakers that often is not seen or not validated by those who are making decisions about work schedule, work flexibility.
This is such a great conversation, and the education of the culturally relevant kind of stuff that you're saying is just amazing. I'm enjoying this so much. Chairman, do you want to jump in on this too? About here's the interesting part for me. Most of the people interaction I have from the Native American community are women. Like literally, like this, most of the women who are like very, and I don't know. I'm clearly I'm a Black man, so I'm ignorant to the dynamics of the culture, but it seems to me that women are really empowered. I don't know. So why don't you answer that question for me, Chairman?
Sure. I guess I'll just share from observation. Clearly, I'm not a woman, but my wife is a woman, and how she's dealt with in the pandemic is how just from my observation is it really brought her circle of three other women of various ages really tightly together to be able to talk about those stresses. They were good friends before, but now they're like sisters, and so her reliance on her girlfriends and our culture, I think, has really been what was also able to help prop her up when things got tough, or kids got into trouble, whatever it might be, that her daily stresses or work, I've seen that, as I guess her response to the pandemic is that, she brought her three other closest friends in and really made that circle really tight. And so, I'm assuming they talk probably every 15 minutes via text anyway. It seems like anyway. But, and so I think a lot of that too is, reliance, as I mentioned, on our culture as well, being able to get our ceremonies done and still be able to, have conversations with our cultural leaders as well about things that are going on. And I think as mentioned before about, even having therapists and psychologists available, that look like us is a challenge. But I think as we continue to strive to be healthier human beings individually, we all learn at different paces and have experienced different things, and having that tight circle of friends to either share or learn from, I think was a major, I guess, silver lining in this particular situation too for, my wife. And so that's just what, I've been able to observe. So I just, share about that much. Thank you.
Community, 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 community. That's what all you're saying in different ways. Community, community, community. Okay, so two more questions. I'm gonna let you go because this has been a wonderful conversation. I could do this all day because I'm actually learning. Okay, so now put yourself where you are now today, and if you could go back 2 years, 3 years when the pandemic was about to hit as a leader, then what would you tell yourself, knowing everything that you've gone through now? What would Robyn go tell her 2 years ago self? What would you tell yourself 2 years ago? Chairman Hill, what would you say 2 years ago? Knowing everything that you've learned now through the pandemic as a leader, what would you go back and tell yourself? Like, here are the things you should know. Like, here are the things that you've learned through this pandemic. Let me start with you, Maya, on that one.
And again, the question is, if I could go back to myself 2 years before the pandemic, what would I tell myself?
Right now, today, you go back, everything you've learned, you go back 2 years. What would you tell yourself?
And again, I've been very fortunate, and you guys know about some of the medical health life crisis that, and that has always prioritized myself. I think one of the things that I wish I would have done sooner, was I wish I would have accepted sooner some of the offers to be visible for my BIPOC community. I think not saying yes or not inquiring soon enough really delayed some access, or maybe not even myself, but implementing or suggesting or getting other people involved. I think not discouraged, but delayed, and so I think that's one of the one. And then also one of the ones was just kind of like to really continue with my mental health. I think that's something that has always within, if you talk to my partner, you talk to our 9-year-old daughter, that's something that our family is very conscientious about, particularly with all the anti-Asian hate that was going on, communication. So that was something that our family has always been really strong about, and really making sure that we normalize that it was okay if you were sad or that you were mad, and that you didn't always have to be quote unquote, happy or accommodating, especially knowing like our Asian stereotype that is perceived within the dominant. So we were, and so I think one of the things that I would have, been able to encourage or to say, or to tell myself 2 years ago was to sustain with the mental health journey. That's
fabulous. And that tells what you've learned. Like you're talking about prioritizing, like you're just focusing, the changing your priority, what you prioritize. And so that tells me a lot there. So Chairman Hill, what about you? What would you go back and tell your younger self 2 years ago as a leader?
Well, I think very similarly, just the mental health aspect of it, I think is very important. And for me, just relating back to, my culture and my language and things like that, and my beliefs that, carry us through, those tough times. And, that was kind of one of the points I wanted to make sure that I was carrying forward, even pre-pandemic, was, just in relation to the stresses of this type of job, was to make sure I remained strong with those beliefs in our culture and our way of life and things like that. And those teachings, so that, I can maintain, good mental health, so that, in tough situations, I hopefully have the clarity of mind to be able to make the right decision, or be able to, relay the message in the best possible way to the audience, whoever that might be. And so for me, it was really just probably relying on that point of, telling my younger self that, make sure you're taking care of yourself, taking care of your personal ceremonies, and making sure that you're not losing your way and straying away from, our cultural beliefs, and really take that time to pull that in and keep examining, those teachings to be able to, again, reflect that back in our community. Because a lot of our traditional teachings talks about, what it is to be a leader, to be a chief, and things like that. And so that's important to me. And so I just make sure I try to keep that central.
It's interesting. Mine's really is health. Yours is really about tradition, culture. I hear a spiritual aspect to what you're saying too. So what about you, Robyn?
Yeah. Wow. I do remember maybe at the end of the third week, because, when we shut down the office very quickly, we're like, yeah, we'll see you in 2 weeks. We'll be back. It'll, whatever we thought was going to happen. And I remember about to check in with our senior leadership team and just going, oh my gosh, like, what am I supposed to tell? Like, this is a pandemic. Like, I've never led through a pandemic. No one else has. But what am I supposed to, like, what do I do? And then in that moment, so, going back to relying on your faith, and I was reminded, okay, you have led through difficult situations in the past, and you didn't get a heads up on what that was going to be, but you had to take one step at a time and make your way through. So you have led through difficulty in the past. You can do that again. And I was like, okay. And then really being mindful of taking care of myself, all of that. But if I had to look back, I did not anticipate how emotional it would be to witness the George Floyd murder and everything that came after it. I was undone in a way that I had never been before. And some of that, I think, is the desensitization that it's another murder. And we internalize it, and then we keep it moving, right? Because this is part of our daily experience, unfortunately. In that moment, though, it was like, wait, the emotions, and some people asking how I felt, and then realizing, oh my gosh, how much had been internalized over the years, right? That and how many things, I had encountered recently. And then, so if I had known then, like, this is what you should be prepared for, and how to navigate through that. And then how to turn that into a voice, so that when we're coming into the room and people, oh, Robyn, tell us why you're here. I'm here because I want to make sure that there's a table for the people coming behind me, just being much more vocal, and also and advocating, not just for other people, but also for myself. Like, I'm not going to deal with this anymore. Now I'm going to find a nice way to talk about it and build a bridge. But we're not, this isn't okay. And I need to share with you why. And now how do we move forward?
What's unique about this question and how you'll answer this, some people would say, oh, I wish I would have saved more money, or I would have, like that. None of you hitting none of those material type of things. It was all more mental health, spiritual, my identity, my emotions, what I was feeling, or I should have been advocated more. Like I'm hearing all those things, and that's unique, right? I mean, I don't want to say it's just a person of color thing, but it might be, right? Like, it's like you're all talking about things about identity, health, spirituality, and that's not about saving money, or what I mean. So that's that's powerful within itself. Maya, you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I don't know if it's so much about, and I noticed that none of us mentioned like material items, finance, and I'm not sure if that was what the pandemic prioritized for us, on saying, and so I keep thinking about my young 9-year-old daughter, and during the pandemic, we had her once a day write what she was grateful for. Oh. What she was blessed to have. And none of it was money. It was, I was so blessed to see my auntie today. I've not seen her in 300, and so I kept on thinking, gratitude is something that I would have also told myself 2 years ago, is to have that sense of gratitude and, blessedness of knowing opportunity, health, all of that stuff that, is coming in the next 2 years.
Which leads to my last question. Perfect segue to the last question. So COVID has happened. There's some things that have changed for the better. As I think Robyn mentioned earlier, that access, we figured out people just can't come to us. We have to go to them. Some things probably didn't work out for the best. Like, so for people listening, what would you say moving forward that we learned from COVID that we changed for the better to change systems? And what things we leave behind that didn't work well? Like, what are those two things that you think you would answer? And I will start with you, Robyn, on this one. I'm sorry. Did you want me to start somewhere else? No, I don't want to get in trouble. Should I start somewhere else?
No. That's fine. Wow. One of the phrases that I know that we've all heard is, "Oh, I'm so glad that we're finally getting back to normal." And so recently I have, depending on the environment, have really been challenging folks. So what do you mean by that? Because I agree that we're now in a space where we can gather together safely. We have some protocols. We don't have to wear a mask all the time. So I get that kind of freedom. At the same time, though, what does normal mean? Because if we go back to your question 2 years ago, it wasn't that great for a lot of people in our communities. And if you're saying that we need to return to that, I'm challenging you on that, because we shouldn't be satisfied that the disparities were off the charts for people in our community. And we should not, and we don't want to come back to it. So is that the normal that you want to go back to? Because that's not okay. And, and I said, within the context, because I know sometimes, hey, we're just trying to gather together and like socialize. We're not trying to get deep. But I mean it, because I think that what happens often, we're faced with a crisis. It's a human response. And boy, as soon as the crisis is over, we just want to move on and pretend it didn't happen. And if we keep doing that, then these issues continue to surface and that we never solve them. So, or we don't get after it. One of the other things that's my major thought on that. Let's think about, what are we returning to? We shouldn't want to return to normal in every aspect of our lives. And what are we going to do to make sure that we don't, for the betterment and the elevation of our entire community?
Thank you for that. That's that. Not to return back to normal. What is normal, right? So, Chairman Hill, same question to you.
Yeah, I think, similarly, I think for us, it's just been kind of a continuous improvement process. Obviously, we don't want to go back to where we were, 2 years ago either. But how can we do things better? And as we evaluate our programs and services to our tribal members and to our community, what's working, what hasn't, what's effective, and what is meaningful, I think has been a lot of the questions we've been trying to get to over this last 2 years. What's making a meaningful difference to our tribal members and to our community, and so really trying to evaluate those, efficiencies in that service delivery or whatever it might be. And so I hope we continue with that as a continuous improvement effort to make things better, create more and better and stronger relationships with other aspects of the community, the larger community in Northeast Wisconsin. And again, I think we're just trying to make sure that we're telling our story, like today. We each have our own story, and we're different parts of organization, but we live here together in the Fox Valley, Northeast Wisconsin. And so being able to share that information, share our story, I think helps create better bonds to be able to move forward in our community, and creates those, lasting friendships and relationships to, again, work together. That's, always been a part of, our vision, is having a a safe and healthy environment, and then also a vibrant community to live, work, and play. So, that's something that, we strive to move forward with, all the time. And then, again, that's just that continuous improvement and continuous measurement and being able to evaluate the effectiveness of whatever it is we're doing and try to make it better and just being efficient. So I think that's my share today. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for that. Mai?
I think for me, I hope that we can, I hope we realize that we can always prioritize people first. That was something that I noticed that with the pandemic from the education lens, so I'm going to bring up the example of like Wi-Fi. We always knew that our rural areas did not have dependable Wi-Fi, but before the pandemic, it was not a priority. And then all of a sudden, somehow, very quickly, it happened, and so I think that radical change tells me that if we had prioritized people, this is something that could have happened, and having the accountability for our local and state governance, I think that really is what I'm kind of taking from that. I think about the education. Again, I have a young child. And just to know that, all of a sudden breakfast and lunch is now taken care of for those who may not have that opportunity. Food shortage and hunger has always been an issue with our K through 12. But again, with the pandemic, all of a sudden it's magnified. And again, we are able to find funding to be able to feed everybody, knowing that there is food shortage now, or knowing that there is hunger issues within our young people, or knowing that, kids learn better on a full belly. And not having, but again, being able to find that money, being able to that. And what I fear for is once that pandemic is quote unquote gone, all of a sudden, Wi-Fi access for our rural community is then minimized because we're done with that, is having sustainable breakfast and lunches. Is that something that's going to be sustained for those who are very vulnerable in our area? Or because once the pandemic is done, you're kind of on your own. So I think about all of that kind of safety net that we developed for the pandemic. Is it going to be cut loose once we consider that this is our new normal, or you are now out there to fend for yourself? It's no longer a people first decision. It's now profits first, or what works best for the organization.
Well, thank you so much for all of your time. Thank you for joining us, Chairman Hill. Thank you so much for brother for joining us again and giving us your wisdom and always represent Oneida in such a wonderful way. So thank you for doing that. And I can't wait to get up there and check you out in person again. So thank you. And thank you, Robyn. So everything you do at United Way, thank you so much. For 5 years, hope they can keep you 5 more years, right? I mean, it's hard to keep talent these days. So people at United Way, make sure you're treating her right, because everyone wants talent these days. Everywhere I go, people are looking for people. So thank you, Robyn, for everything you're doing. And Mai, thank you so much for your wonderful heart, all the things you're doing. You are just a treasure. Thank you for what you're doing for UW Green Bay. And they better hold on to you, too. We'll take you down here. We'll take you. We'll snatch you up. So they better treat you right. But no, seriously, thank you all for joining us. And hopefully we'll see you all again soon. Thank you so much.
This is 365 Media.